Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the film Poor Things. All right, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Poor Things.
The incredible tale about the fantastical evolution of Bella Baxter, a young woman brought back to life by the brilliant and unorthodox scientist Dr. Godwin Baxter.
Incredible tale of the fantastical story.
Evolution.
These are very well chosen adjectives for this story. All right, let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for Poor Things. Sarah, what was yours?
Mine is, there is a shortage of good doctors in this world.
Yes. Where are they? But also,
not in this movie.
If they were here, we would not get the story of Bella Baxter, and that
Very
would be
true.
a terrible thing for all of us. So, but yeah, they are nowhere to be seen.
Nope.
My one-sentence summary is not Yo Mama's coming-of-age story.
Yeah, definitely not.
No, this is a beloved genre, and yeah, this breaks many of the stereotypes and barriers of this type of story. All right. Let's dive in to our thoughts about Poor Things. In this first section, we will not spoil this movie and just share our thoughts at a high level. I am so curious to hear your thoughts because we have been anticipating getting to watch this movie for several weeks now. I think we slotted this way back in the middle of December? Beginning of December?
Because it was originally shown to release on, I think, December 8th. Okay?
Yes, but it was a limited release, but we were excited.
But that fine print was not anywhere that we found. And so I felt deceived. I was upset. I wanted to watch Poor Things on December 8th and was unable to. Yeah. So here we are, over a month later, and we finally have done it.
We finally did it. Yes. And, it's fitting that this is kind of our first recording, first episode to reviewing a movie for 2024. And I think this is a very, we're jumping at 2024 with a splash.
We sure are.
What's also, just while we're on the topic of release dates and theaters and stuff, I don't know about you and the area that you live in, but this movie was only shown in very select theaters in my area and very few showtimes, which I was really surprised by. I was expecting a lot more showtimes, almost all theaters showing this movie. And I'm kind of surprised to see that it's not gotten as broad of a release, but that could just be some quirk of the area that I'm in. I'm curious if that was the case for you. I would expect this to be kind of a no-brainer. You've got Emma Stone, absolute darling that people love, and kind of a really fun and interesting concept for people to go and see and talk about. It's artsy-fartsy, and it's out there, but it's got mass appeals. But I'm curious, what was it like for you?
Yeah, I was surprised at how available this was.
Good.
There were a number of theaters close to me that were showing, and I am an old person, so I like to go to the first showing. Absolutely. So I didn't even bother looking to see if there were additional showtimes, but yeah, there were plenty of showtimes, plenty of theaters around me. I expected this to have, I know we're outside of the limited release window, but I didn't expect it to be as broad as it is around me. Also, I was pretty surprised because I went and saw this at noon on a Tuesday, and my theater was pretty full, and I was surprised by that. Because this is so artsy fartsy, even though it does have Emma Stone and it's getting talked up a lot. Yeah, I'm not sure who the market for this movie is because it is so weird and off the wall, and I feel like you have to be into artsy fartsy movies, or you have to be a real movie person to seek this out. So I was pleasantly surprised by how many people were in my theater.
I have to tell you, my theater was also absolutely packed. I think there
Wow.
were maybe, well, I like to skip the previews and go and
Mhm.
time my arrival at said theater
Yeah.
perfectly, a 15 minutes to 17 minutes after the showtime, because I know that's always when they begin to wrap them up. And so I went like kind of late, and I was, on the kiosks picking my seat. And I'm used to there being a million seats available and only a few that show as selected of ones that are occupied. So my Tuesday after work brain saw a absolute sea of gray seats and thought those were the ones that I should be clicking on.
Wow.
And there were about three green seats available. I my Tuesday brain was talking to the employee. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble like checking out and picking my seat. She's like, oh, you need to press the green ones. I was like, oh, so you're telling me there's only three seats available. And those out of
Wow.
those three, a lot of them are like in the middle of rows and seated between like large groups of people. So
Mhm.
my theater was literally packed to the brim. Like two seats were available by the time I walked in, um,
Wow.
which I'm so pleased by. I haven't had this experience since Barbie, and what a treat! And for a movie like this too, I'm just so excited that there was appetite, that there was enough drum and conversation getting talked up about this on social media, that people are, maybe even through word of mouth, that people are going to watch this together and selling out theaters. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome, especially because this is so off the wall and artistic, and I don't know, like this does not have the same type of mass appeal that Barbie did. So it's really
Mhm.
cool that people are flocking to go see this and filling up theaters after work on a Tuesday night. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really great. And I don't know about your theater, but my theater loved this. Like it was a little like we got to get, going a little bit and kind of buy into the world, but I've distinctly noticed the crescendo over the course of the movie of more and more and more laughter as people were like investing in this story and the zaniness of it all. Like there were a ton of laughter and kind of that communal experience of this theater going experience. So I'm curious if you have a pulse on how your theater felt about the movie.
I don't think that my theater enjoyed this movie
Okay.
as much.
Uh-huh.
I had a good time with it. And there were
Mhm.
times though when it was like me and maybe like two or three other people laughing. Like I could hear like distinct voices laughing at portions. So I think the general consensus of my theater was maybe like, hey, this is a little weird. What what really surprised me is that about halfway through, there was a group of like three or four people who walked out of the theater and did not return. And that
Wow. Wow,
surprised
wow,
me
wow.
because
I'm
like it also
fascinated.
didn't happen at like a really dramatic point where you'd be like, oh, I am offended, I must leave. Like it was just kind of like
Mm.
we're kind of in the middle and things are just going, and
They
I
were
don't know,
like,
there
"Nope."
wasn't anything like particularly alarming. So I thought that that was interesting.
That's
So uh
fascinating.
yeah,
I
I
rarely see that happen.
me too.
What I
So
just wanna know, like, their life story. I wanna talk to them, I wanna hear their thoughts about it.
yes.
That's so interesting to see, like, what didn't work for them. I know, it's out there, it's a lot. It can be a lot.
Yeah,
And
it is a lot.
uncomfortable too in some
Yeah.
parts.
Yeah. So like if you're going to walk out of a movie, like I can see how this would maybe be that, but I was just a little perplexed
Yeah.
at the timing, I think was what it was, because it was like
Mm.
this is kind of tame compared to some of the other stuff that we've already seen. So it was funny, but
Mm.
yeah, I enjoyed it. I think a handful of other people in the theater really enjoyed it too, and then everybody else was maybe like mediocre. This
Mm.
is fine.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's out there. It's there's a lot to recoil at, but there's also a lot to lean into and kind of digest. Uh, so okay, so tell me your thoughts about this film. It sounds like you enjoyed it. Walk me through that a little bit more.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so fun. This is such a wild, zany ride. And it's also, like we've mentioned, so artistic. And I think that's just gonna pull me in. I'm just a sucker for an artsy fartsy film. And this is definitely that. And I really loved watching the evolution of Bella as she goes through all of these different stages. And I think it's really interesting to just kind of reflect on how she tries on these different skins, almost, of like, who do I want to be, who am I becoming, and you get to see like what parts of her she keeps and which parts of her she discards. And I don't know, it's just a really cool way to show this coming of age that we all go through as we age, but this is obviously in a very dramatic, larger than life way. So I think that there's a lot that this movie does that is just so fun and fresh and interesting, and I think it's a hilarious movie. There are great performances in this. It's gorgeous. Holy moly, this movie is
Mhm.
beautiful. So there's just a lot in this that I think work together really well, and it'll make you think after, which is just a great time.
Yeah, yeah. This is such an exciting movie in so many aspects. I think um it's amazing to see something so fresh and so well executed, and uh, from many aspects. I think the actors are nailing the timing of a lot of the moments in this movie that I think really require that sensitivity and execution of when to pause, when to linger, and when to just you know hammer in that punchline. But man, I think, to be honest, I feel like I'm still digesting this movie and processing it. There's so much there. I think that I've been thinking a lot about the framing of this movie through the lens of Bella, this character who, in a lot of ways, is untouched and unmolded by the world because she has been so isolated. And so when she goes out and experiences the world, the film is able to comment on and examine so many aspects of our society, our relational dynamics, different types of perspectives and psyches. Like, there's so much that this movie can just examine, comment on, showcase through Bella and the way that she interacts with it. And I think what's kind of maybe refreshing about a character like Bella is that she's so unencumbered by all of the things that we as adults operating in society are often burdened by and molded by. And there's like a freshness to the way that she views the world that makes you question why we do things the way they are. Why are they established this way? And in a lot of ways, I feel like this movie could have kept going on for another 2, 3 hours, and we just watch Bella experience modern society and the ways that things are done. And that would have been so interesting because there's so many new worlds, so many new aspects about who we are as people that I just wanted to hear what Bella thinks about, and watch her interact with them. So I've been thinking a lot about that framing. I would think that this movie would be really fascinating to put in conversation with Barbie in a lot of very different
Mhm.
types of movies,
Yeah.
obviously, but a lot of their structure and their framing is quite similar to me. I was thinking about Barbie a lot during this movie of this there's an innocence and a purity about this character who is a female who is thrown into modern society and figures out how to survive, and she's molded by it, but she's also impacting and influencing the world in which she inhabits. And there's a lot of like fascinating commentary that like we can pull out from just watching that character interact with the world. So I think that like this movie has a lot to say and does it so efficiently and tightly, and I honestly could have had more of it.
Yeah, I kept thinking about Barbie as well. And I was like, wow, like what
Oh, so
these
interesting.
movies couldn't be more different, aesthetically, tonally, all of that. And yet there's some really interesting commonalities between the two. Uh, that I think are really really interesting, and they're exploring some similar topics, but they go about it very differently, which is also interesting. And so it's fun to, I don't know, collect these different movies together and see what we can learn kind of viewing them side by side too. I think that's so interesting that both Barbie and Poor Things came out in 2023, uh and they're similar in a lot of ways. I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah, and what's fascinating too is that the themes that they are captivated by also seem to echo each other in a lot of ways. I mean, there's obviously like a whole buffet of themes that Poor Things explores and that Barbie explores, but I think one that both movies kind of choose to spend quite a bit of time on is the gender roles and gender dynamics between men and women and how those expectations are set, and the ways that we might want to break them and challenge them. And I think it's a fascinating, I mean, they tackle that from so many like very different angles, but because we are in these kind of fantastical worlds and they reflect reality, but they are not grounded in reality, I think it really enables us to really kind of assess these aspects about our society in a way that we can maybe be a little bit more honest and willing to see those things clearly, those hard truths clearly. Whereas in something that does seem more grounded and closer to our lived in experiences and our lived in worlds, we might not be as willing to like go along with it and get sucked into this world and really like see clearly. So, in an interesting way, it's almost like because we are taken out of our lived world, and grounded reality and thrown into this fantastical world that mirrors reality, we can almost see it more clearly. Which is, I think, a tool that both seem to use in a really smart way.
Yeah, yeah, our guards can be down so that we can receive the information and then maybe think on it, because it's not this like judgmental, like you're doing everything wrong. It's like, wow, let's step into this other world and see how they're doing things. And then it's upon reflection that you're like, oh, wait, maybe there's some things that need some work. So I think that's one of the wonderful things about fiction and fantasy and science fiction and all of that, is that you're able to talk about some maybe very difficult topics, or you're able to explore themes that might be more controversial if you come at them like head on. But if you're doing it in this really fantastical world or through this really creative medium, then people might let their guards down and they might be more willing to engage in some of these topics that they might not otherwise. And like you said, I feel like Poor Things is a good example of that. And there's so many different themes and topics that are interwoven into this as well, that you can just pull out and spend some time thinking about, because I feel like this is really densely packed. And I think it's one that would probably reward a rewatch just because there's so much in here.
Yes, it really is a buffet. I'm curious, what themes were you like kind of mulling on, maybe during the movie or afterwards? What were some of those themes that like you really picked up on and kind of resonated with you?
Do we want to include a spoiler alert
Yes,
before we
let's do that.
dive in?
Let's do that before we dive into the details. So, if you haven't seen Poor Things, we highly recommend checking it out. Go to a theater, watch this movie before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. Well worth your time to go watch this movie. Okay, yes. All right, go for it.
Yeah, I think one of the patterns in this that I found really interesting is this concept of like captivity and freedom. Uh, and you see that at the very beginning, where uh, Godwin is keeping Bella in that house because she is an experiment. She has freedom, but as long as she stays within his boundaries. And so she seeks freedom in these like small moments of rebellion. So she'll go up to the roof, or she'll demand that they go on a picnic, and then she comes back and she's trapped again. And so then she seeks rebellion with Duncan, and then he ends up trapping her too. And it's just this constant cycle of her. Anytime she thinks that she finds freedom, then she ends up being trapped again, and she is constantly seeking ways to escape those moments when she is restricted. And it was just so fascinating to watch her. Like, at the beginning she rebels, then she begins to use like sexuality to escape. Then when she's stuck on the ship, she meets new friends and she starts to explore ideas, and that allows her a means of escape. She tries to escape by being charitable and giving that money away. She finds all of these different ways to try and escape the circumstances that she's in. And it was just fascinating to watch the ramifications of those actions, and how, I don't know, I almost felt like there was this expansion and contraction all throughout this film, and you saw her evolving kind of within that regular rhythm that we see throughout the movie. And I loved that structure and that kind of like cyclical thing that we just kept walking through the entire runtime.
And isn't that so reflective of life sometimes that like you
Hello.
feel you're
Yep.
in a rut and then you make a change or you do something different or you move or you change something and then there's the like the the adventure of it all, but also there's the unknowns, the fear, the moments of being uncomfortable with all of that, but there's the thrill of the adventure, and then you kind of settle and you settle down, you settle into a pace, into a rhythm, and then you find yourself kind of wondering what's next. And it was neat to see that the movie gave her and gave those scenes enough time to breathe in those moments where she's like, what am I doing now, like the one that really stood out
Mhm.
to me was when she'd been at the brothel for a while, and she's just kind of lying in bed and she's like, yeah, I don't, she's kind of settled into her rhythm and her pace, and you can feel that budding sense of like, man, that just the restlessness, the itchiness to go and explore. And um then we're kind of whisked off into the next sequence, the next chapter of her story. But that expansion and contraction is so resonant of how we live our lives sometimes. I don't know. It resonated with me for sure.
And I think that's what helps make this relatable. Like, obviously it's a very different world. It's a very weird adventure that she's going on, but she is in some ways following the phases of development that we all have gone through, to some degree. Obviously, we're not all as dramatic as Bella. But I think that helps make her more human and helps us empathize with her. We've all rebelled in some sort of way. We've all sought adventure in some sort of way. We've all made choices where we're like, well, this is probably going to be a mistake, but I'm going to do it anyway. We've gone through these cycles of learning and discovery and reinvention. And so even though Bella is so different and this world is so different, there's still elements of her that are so human that we can relate to and empathize with. And I think that helps make this journey with this character even more fun and enjoyable.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think what's also neat is to see the ways that as she expands and contracts and adventures and then finds herself, thirsting for the next thing. Um, we see that her desires change as well. Like I think in
Mhm.
the first kind of budding section, I think it's when they're in Lisbon. Um, you see her discover these like physical pleasures from the tarts and the food and the visuals and her sexuality. And it's neat to see that evolve when she goes to her ship chapter. And you see this adventuring happening within her mind and the world of ideas and through conversation with her new friends and the cynic, and that like intellectual adventure that all of a sudden is opened up, and she's got this like voracious appetite to read. And that like that maturing in what she defines as adventure, I think was also really interesting. And if you think about the way that like children develop and human beings develop as they grow older, I think there's a lot of really fascinating parallels in the ways that we kind of expand in our dimensions of how we experience the world. And it goes from maybe one or two dimensions, and then there's all of a sudden all of these new aspects that we've discovered, that we have like a brain that can think and converse with people. um, and how that continues to change and evolve over time.
Yeah, and how in that evolving we take pieces with us. You know, we can see in Bella how some of the elements that we saw at the very beginning of the movie she has carried with her throughout, and then other pieces she's either discarded or they're maybe not as important as they once were. And so it's kind of cool to see her almost like leveling out and settling into who she is. I feel like this movie takes you through like all of these extremes, you know, like you were just saying, like that moment in Lisbon where she is just like it's gluttony on steroids. Like she's just having a great time indulging in everything. And it's all these new experiences for her. But then like by the end, she's really come into her own and kind of leveled out. Again, I feel like we do that as people too. Like you kind of like reach a point in your life where you're like, yeah, man, this is who I am. Like I feel good in my skin. I know myself. I can make decisions. I have this agency, and I know me. I feel like me. And so I think that's, again, I think that's what makes Bella so interesting, is like we all go through similar things too, and it's so cool to see this female protagonist doing all of these different things, indulging in all of these things, having all of these experiences, and then you see her really come into herself, and she's able to land the plane. To include a weird metaphor into this, I don't know, it was just so cool to see she's no longer this wobbly girl, but she's also not um restricted by these elements of polite society like they talk about throughout the movie, but she is restrained in the ways that she wants to be restrained rather than restrained by an external force. And I don't know, that's really cool and really liberating to see her go on that journey.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't know about you, but I wonder if other people have this experience, but there's something so compelling and refreshing about the way that Bella just does not play by the rules of polite society. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the most funny moments are when she just breaks every rule and does not care at all. And I think it's also the ones that are like the most, emotionally like meaningful, because I think there's there's a set of like self-consciousness, there's a set of like human relational rules, for lack of a better word, honestly, of like how you're supposed to behave and act and do all the things. And to see someone, one, challenge those ideas, but then two, find a way to understand them, and then take the things that she believes make sense, and the ones that don't, she just lets them brush off of her and kind of lives her life with such agency. I mean, talk about a female protagonist that has the most amount of agency. This whole movie is her just saying,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I want to do and I'm going to go do it. I think that there's something so inspiring and exciting about seeing someone just kind of take life by the horns and chart her own path and live with this kind of vitality. I think one of the themes that really stood out to me is there's a moment, and I forget who it was. It might be it's one of the actually women in her life. It might be her friend on the ship, but there's this idea that they talk about called knowing the world, and it's basically the premise is basically, any experience that you have shapes you, and you take something from it and you learn from it, and you take that into your next season. And I think there's a critical moment where she realizes that fact. And so her willingness to embrace new things and new experiences and not be afraid of consequences is, I think, something that is so compelling about her. And I love Mark Ruffalo's character because I think you see the way that he is also just enthralled by that aspect of her. Um, but there's often like a, I think as you age and get older with maturity, maybe there comes a sense of like of wariness, of carefulness. And I think on the flip side of it, there's a healthy amount of embracing experiences and not being afraid of whatever those emotions and difficult things might be. And one of the scenes that was really memorable for me is the one where she goes with her friend who's the cynic, and they essentially go out and see poverty, and she sees it for the
Mm-hmm.
first time. And
Yeah.
it's hard and it breaks her heart and it's painful. But I think it's the perfect illustration of that experience was maybe a negative emotion, but at the end of the day, there's a deeper understanding that she has around the world and how it works and what her place could be in it and how she can help shape it or contribute to it, that is so meaningful. And so when she down the line later in the film makes a decision to go with her former husband, I suppose, the awful asshole human being
Mm-hmm.
who's the
Yeah.
absolute worst, right? I think there's a sense of like, I don't know what this is, but I need to find out. And there's a curiosity there. And that willingness to kind of embrace experiences, I thought was really smartly done and illustrated, not in like a, I think maybe in the early parts of her journey, it's more just, irresponsible and she just doesn't know and she's just excited. But I think as she develops and matures, there is a knowingness that she has around the decisions that she makes, and knowing the consequences, but choosing to do them anyway, because there's a deeper understanding that she will have about herself, about the world around her, that comes from it. I loved the way that this film illustrated that.
Yeah, and I love that it doesn't shy away from those negative emotions too. I feel like it would be easy for a character like this to just focus on the happy emotions and avoid what we might call the bad or the negative emotions. Uh, but instead, we see her really grappling through those, and I love the way that even though she doesn't talk about her emotions the way that we do, she's able to communicate so much of what she's feeling, and she's able to articulate, like, you make me feel bad and you make me angry, even though she doesn't use those words. And I love that the film shows her exploring those things, and like you said, like seeking to understand more. And I loved those moments when she's like, wait, I'm feeling a bad thing. She recognizes it. And then she makes a decision to potentially improve what's going on. So in those moments when with Duncan, when he's making her feel bad and she's able to go, she takes it for a little bit and then she goes, wait, I I don't need to feel like this. And so then she removes herself from the situation. So it's all of these little things where I'm like, oh, you are learning
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence right before our eyes. You are learning agency right before our eyes. And it's just so fun to watch a character grow and evolve like that. I feel like in a lot of these coming of age movies, of course the character grows, of course the character learns about themselves, but I feel like it's rare that we get to see a transformation as drastic as this one so quickly. Like, this is not a long movie, and she goes through so many stages of life. And I don't know, it's impressive to me how much they were able to pack into this, that it's still fun and lighthearted and funny, but there's this emotional depth to it too. So I mean, days later you're still thinking about the journey that she goes on. It's a testament to how well written and how well paced this is.
Yes, yes, totally agree. And I think the other aspect which you nailed was like this movie doesn't work if we're not invested in her journey. And the ability for one, the writing of this character, but two, the way that Emma Stone shows up before bringing Bella to life, and
Mm-hmm.
the way the movie quickly endears us to her is so amazing and so fascinating. Like this movie is so quirky and out there, but yet it knows how to weave in those incredibly human moments that we're like, oh, that's me, or like, oh, I can relate to that experience. That's I've gone through something similar, and I'm rooting for Bella. Like the whole movie, we are just rooting for her to experience things, to grow, and we're invested in her journey. And the movie's able to accomplish that quite fast. So I think that the magic of this movie is, you're right. It's not actually the stuff. It's I mean, all that stuff is great too. But it's also like we are so invested in this character growing up and discovering herself and discovering the world that it's emotionally satisfying at the end, instead of just being maybe like a interesting societal commentary or whatnot. There's a emotional core there as well that really does work.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. I think Emma Stone helps make this movie as great as it is. And it's great to see her just, I don't know, going all out, like she
Yes.
holds nothing back in this movie, and it's really impressive what she's able to do in this. And it's, I don't know, it's also cool. I I feel like she is one of those actresses that like I've this is gross, but like I've grown up alongside, and so like
Mm-hmm.
seeing her kind of evolve as an actress and seeing some of the choices that she's made, and then for her to be in something like this and really show off just how talented of an actress she is, and also like as a person to be willing to like give yourself over to this character in this way is
Mm.
incredible. Like wow, she is phenomenal in this, and I know she's getting a lot of recognition and like award season stuff, and so it's great to see her being recognized for all of her tremendous work that she's put into this. I think the whole cast does a great job. Mark Ruffalo also, wow,
Yes.
he
So
looks like
good.
he's having a blast in this. He's just going
Yeah.
all out, and
Uh-huh.
again, it's cool to see this actor that we've seen kind of in like one vein
Yeah.
of movie,
Yep.
uh willing to do something totally different, and he does a great job in this as well, and he's a really good uh counterbalance to a lot of these other characters.
Hmm. It's so interesting. We often talk about movies being like symphonies, and every section is playing a specific tune and specific
Hmm.
aspect that comes together. But even if you think about the way that the actors bring to life these characters, it's so fitting that Duncan is the bigger, dramatic, really over the top performance that is big and
Hmm.
flashy and
Yep.
funny, right? And then you've got the other character who plays Max, and Rami Youssef plays that with such a like grounded sensitivity. Like there is no big flashy performance there, and it's so fitting for that character. And together,
Hmm.
those things work well to bring this whole thing to life. And they're all kind of in the orbit of Bella, who is kind of the big centerpiece of it all. But even the way that those two are written and then the way that they're acted, I think is so fitting. They could have done a very like over dramatic version of Max's character also being like having the funny moments or whatever, like not obviously not as big and emotional, but given him the like big flashy stuff. And I think it's actually really fitting that he is quiet, he is understated, he is subtle, and the performance is so as well, because he is that through line that ultimately Bella discovers is what she needs. But the way that they show up for those two roles is so perfect. It's so fitting.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, they both do excellent in this, and then of course there's Willem Dafoe. just living his best
Mother.
life in
Oh
this
my
weird
gosh.
movie. Amazing.
But
Like,
he's perfect for it,
yes.
literally. It's insane.
Yeah, I could think of no one better in this
Right,
role. Yeah, it's
precisely.
almost like it was written just for him.
Oh man, he's so good, and I think in the scenes that he's in, there's this combination, this perfectly balanced combination of something sinister and really wrong is going on, but there's also such a tenderness and kind of this fatherly care that is also woven in there as well. And he kind of can strike that perfect balance between these two things and vacillates between those. I mean, the score, we've got to talk about the score because the score is
Oh,
doing
yes.
so much as well to like help play into that. But um, the perfect balance of this is really messed up. And also, there's this really sweet. And how can those two things coexist? I don't know, but they do.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. When you need those two things to coexist, you got to call Willem Dafoe. That's your option cuz he will nail it every time.
Yeah, yeah, totally agreed. He's perfectly cast for that role. It's like it's written for him. I mean, he's there's
Mhm.
there's past roles that he's played and performances that I think you can see why they chose him for this. So good.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I feel like with Willem Dafoe, like the weirder the better for him. And I feel like this supports that hypothesis.
So the first time he does his little blowing bubble scene,
Oh.
theater absolutely silent. Everyone's like, "What the f is actually going on screen right now?" Every time towards the end, though, there's this like two or three people that are absolutely dying laughing, and it's just this kind of perfect example of the way this movie just gets you to surrender over to it. You're just like, I don't know, this is weird, but it's really funny, like every scene.
Mhm. Ugh, it's so good. I loved it. I was like, this is so weird and zany. And there were like three other people who were also laughing at it. It was great. I was like, okay, I need to find you other voices who find this funny, and we can just like huddle together and have a great time together watching Willem Dafoe burp his little bubble things.
Well, what's great is that like it comes up again at least two or three more times in like the
Hmm.
last third of the movie, and they
Yeah.
literally serve no plot purpose at all. It's
Yes.
purely for people like us to just be like, "That's really weird. I don't get it," but the man's doing his thing, and Max
It's
is just
great.
silently like sitting next to him. Oh man.
Well, and I think that's also what helps make it funny is it's so obviously it's weird, but it's also out of place, especially because they're in this really like ornate, elegant dining room. We've already talked so much about polite society and how you're supposed to act around other people, and then here he is burping weird bubble things at the dinner table. And it's the weirdness with the juxtaposition with Max being, I don't know, silent, somewhat okay with it. It all works together perfectly.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. Oh man. So good. Um, okay, other things that we wanted to chat about, other themes maybe that stood out to you or aspects of this filmmaking.
Yeah, another theme that I was just thinking about is generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I feel like we see that a lot with Willem Dafoe's character. You know, I love the way that the movie unfolds kind of some of his backstory, and you learn along the way how his father experimented on him and essentially tortured him as a child. And then that helps to kind of like reframe how he has become the man that he has become, and you can see, like you were mentioning, that mix of sinister that I think he probably inherited from his dad and learned from his dad. But then you see that tenderness that he has from Bella at the same time. And so even though, yes, he has experimented on her and he's passed that down, he's trying to do better than his dad did. And then you see Bella wanting to go into surgery too, wanting to follow that same path that Godwin did. But I don't know, at least for me, like it ended with a little bit of hope that she will do even better than he did. And she's grown so much as a person and learned who she is, and also learned the value of life and seen the beauty of humanity, that maybe she will do more good in the world than Godwin was able to do. And so I don't know, just the way that we inherit things from our family, but then we seek to maybe do better than they did, or maybe not follow exactly in those same footsteps, and we can chart our own course, kind of like Bella did. So yeah, I think there's some commentary around generational trauma and what we inherit just kind of buried in here too, in addition to all of the other things, which I think is kind of fascinating.
Yeah. And I think what's also interesting too is that, there's another version of the story that we've seen, which is like a total rejection of whatever craft is that, you were
Hmm.
born into or whatnot. Like it would be Bella basically doing the complete opposite of anything related to science or being a doctor, right? Because it's like, like I've experienced or seen the horrors of that. Therefore, we just reject it entirely. And I love that this is a much more nuanced version of it. And instead of let's run from it and reject it entirely, it's like, no, let's do it in a healthy way. Um, and hopefully this team that has now formed between her and Max together as well can be a healthier like balance of decision making and judgment and all the kind of thing around like the practices that they use and whatnot. So I like that it feels like incremental progress versus we're going to just totally revolutionize everything and just do the total opposite, which is like another version of like the coming of age, which is I'm going to do whatever I want. And there's a respect and there's a appreciation that you see that Bella has for his work. I think there's a really interesting moment towards the end of the movie where she's in the operating room and she's like, I feel the most myself in this room. And I thought
Hmm.
that was just like it's such a fascinating line to include and kind of unexpected. I didn't think that she was actually going to be a doctor as well. It's not where I thought this movie was going. I don't know where I thought this movie was going. I had no idea. I was just thrown into the pod and, we're going somewhere. Um, but I didn't expect that ending of her kind of inheriting his craft and taking it to the next generation.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. And I think that incremental change that you mentioned is again what makes this, even though this is like out there pretty zany, helps make this more believable. I feel like a lot of what we experience in life is incremental change, which can be very frustrating, but it's also true to life. And so it even that ending, it wasn't, even though it was happy and it was funny, it didn't feel like overly rosy. She is still the Bella that we got to know, and she is just entering into this new chapter of her life, and we trust that now she's going to make good decisions too, and she's probably going to make some mistakes too, because that's just life. But she's going to be okay in this world. So even that ending is not overly happy, the way that it ties all of these different threads together.
Yeah. I mean, they still took the general or her ex-husband and like
Hmm.
turned him into a I don't know, a goat. Was it a
The
goat?
goat.
A goat
Yep.
man?
I mean,
you
honestly,
know?
not a
I'm
bad
like,
idea,
all right.
because he sucked. So he deserved to be turned into a goat.
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. And but there's also her friend from Paris that was also with
Mm-hmm.
them. I miss
Yeah.
this like community that's been created. Because I think in the beginning of the film, you kind of see that the loneliness and the isolation that Godwin experienced. It's just him and like one um, maid who didn't really have a relationship with at all. It didn't seem like it was very like professional and you know, polite society, courteous, all that good stuff. And there's now a community that I feel like is formed here that is different and you know, a revision from the way that Godwin did it, which is also different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, things are just better with friends. So if
Yeah.
you're going to take over your dad's really wild, whacked out, kind of kooky surgery, do it with friends.
Mhm.
It'll be better.
Yes. Yes. Sip some cocktails. Watch
Yeah.
the people that your art creations roam around.
Yeah. Perfect. It's a great time.
Oh my gosh, all of the little like animal, you know, mashup combinations. I'm like, this is horrifying, but also I hate that I'm laughing at this little like pug face
Hmm.
attached to chicken. Like, oh my
So funny.
gosh. Oh,
Yeah.
that whole house.
Oh my gosh. It was I think one of the things that I really loved about this film is that it's gorgeous and it's off-putting at the same time.
Yes.
And that is such an interesting balance to try and strike, and I feel like that house is a great example because it's stunning inside and the way that it's laid out is so fascinating. But then like if you look closer, things are just really off in some regards. So
Really
like
wrong.
I loved the dining room, but the tablecloth was clear plastic and the chairs that
Mhm.
they sat in were way too big for them. And so it's just these
Mhm.
little things. It's like when you first enter, you're like, wow, this is a really nice space. This is super cool. But then you're there for a minute and you go, wait a second. This is not right. There's something off here. And the whole movie is like that, which I think makes it so much more fun and interesting. And I felt like I was just constantly just looking around and seeing such a mix of things all the
Mhm.
time, and it was great.
Mhm.
I loved it. I was so entertained. I was like, oh, there's always something to look at. The score, like you mentioned, is
Oh
so
my god.
interesting
So
and
fast.
really contributes to that sense of unease. And so this is just one of those movies where all of these technical components are just working together so flawlessly to help create so much emotion in us as the audience while we're watching.
Mhm. Yes, every aspect. The cinematography, so
Oh, yes.
fascinating. I mean, one, it's just like a quite efficient way to like get us to feel like we're not in the real world anymore. We're in a fantastical, totally different place. The use of the like fisheye lens throughout the especially beginning section, that kind of black and white section was also pretty interesting. It almost felt like this
Mhm.
slow descent into the unveiling of this world and
Yeah.
fullness, and also mirrors the transformation that we experience from Bella's perspective. She goes from kind of being stuck in Kansas to experiencing the world of Oz and all of its like colorful like sensory overload. And I thought just like that was a really smart choice visually, you know. So many interesting like angles that the camera is doing in this movie. Just man, what a feast. What a feast for our brains, a feast for our eyes, a feast for our ears. Just we are just gorging throughout this movie.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing that I want to pay a little bit more attention to if and when I watch it again is once we're in the color section, how the color palettes change based on Bella's evolution. Because like when you go to Lisbon and even on the ship, like when she is in Duncan's orbit, I feel like there's a very distinct color palette and everything is really, really bright. And there are these yellows and these blues and these very rich hues that you're used to. And then as she moves away from Duncan, then she's into more of these like greens and purples. And then once she's
Mhm.
back in London, everything is a little bit more um it's not pastel,
Muted.
but it's
Yeah.
going in that direction, and there's a little bit
Mhm.
more softness to the colors, and even the way that it's filmed is a little bit more soft. And so I think even that's really interesting, that it's not just the transition from black and white to color, but even in the color palettes, she's discovering new colors as she is discovering new parts of herself. And I found
Mhm.
that really interesting. And I'm sure there's more there that I missed. But
Yeah.
I love that intentionality and that attention to detail.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's so true. And the costume choices I also think is probably like along that same vein of what you were saying, so aligned to her transformation, her choices. There is
Hmm.
these like varying levels of over the top costumes and dresses that she's wearing when she's with Duncan, and when she's in Paris there's a lot more darker colors, a lot less flashy and satiny and shiny. And then as that evolves as well, like that transformation and the costume choices, I'm sure has a whole tells a whole story as well that man, it would just be so interesting to notice and take in even more of those details on a second viewing. Yeah, so good.
Yeah,
There's so much.
and oh, there's so much to this. I
Yeah.
think that is what I'm just amazed by, is that this is such like a fun adventure coming of age story, and yet all of these other elements also tell part of the story. And so I think if you were to like isolate certain things like the costume, like the colors used, I'm sure that the isolating the score and taking it bit by bit, like all of those also tell the story. And so again,
Hmm.
this is one of those movies that everything works together to tell this story. And even though there's this juxtaposition of beauty and unease, it works together to tell the story. And I think that that's really impressive, that it was able to pull all of these things off, and it's somehow not a train wreck, or it's not distracting, but all of these things really are working together to get you into Bella's world and into her mind and into this adventure.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a good point that the areas and moments that it needed to be reeled in and grounded, it knew and had the restraint to do, and the areas where it could run wild, uh, it knew how to do that. This could have been an easily like overwhelming experience, like the
Hmm.
Pinocchio, what is it, the live action Pinocchio, where you're just like I
Oh,
need to get out of this world. I
yes.
hate it. It's too much stimulation. It's far too out there. I can't give myself over to it. And what this movie understands deeply is that there's a sense of strings tied to something real, whether it's with the character's experience or their personality, or even a lot of the scenes that are big and out there still have a lot of aspects that are similar to the real world. You've got like markets, you've got street peddlers, you've got musicians. Like there's a lot that is resonant. Um, and that actually makes it a far more interesting experience for the things that are wild and out there. You really can see that contrast now, and it also isn't this kind of absolute tidal wave that you're swept up by.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point,
It's
that it
awesome.
really isn't overwhelming and overstimulating in the
Yeah.
way that it could have been. Like
Hmm.
it is shockingly restrained. And
Yeah.
I think that's what helps make this movie so enjoyable. Like you said, like we're willing to give ourselves over to the movie and suspend disbelief and go for the ride, because it's not too far. It's just far enough, but there's that understanding that I feel like a filmmaker has to have of the audience, and how much
Yeah.
we're willing to like go through in a movie.
Yep.
That's a weird way to
Mhm.
put it, but it's true. Like,
No, it's so
and
true.
this does that. And I think there's also these really cool moments where like it builds up, and then you have a moment to breathe and regroup, and then we go on a different leg of the adventure and we see a new facet of the world. We see a new facet of Bella, and we see how she's changed, and then we have a moment to regroup again and like, oh, okay, now we're in another section of her journey. Okay, here we go. So there's this really nice like ebb and flow
Mm.
throughout, so we can get into that rhythm and go along with the movie. And I think that helps make even some of the more outlandish or surprising moments more bearable, because we're in the rhythm and
Mm.
we're rolling with the tide of the movie.
Yes. And we know that we're going to come back down to earth and we're going to have a moment
Yeah.
of respite. So we're willing to be like, okay, let's go. Let's do this thing. Where are we going next, maybe? Yeah. Okay. Any other last thoughts about this film before we wrap up?
Yes. Did you notice any
Oh,
pinky
no.
rings in this movie, Jen?
I died. You, not in a movie like this. Although I say that for every type of movie, so that really it's just my blanket excuse. But no, I didn't. There's too much happening. Where was it? How did
That's
you notice
fair.
this thing?
I counted 4.
Four?
Um
Oh my
yes.
goodness. Um,
Would you like
all
to
right.
venture any guesses, or would you like me to just say
Are
them?
we do the guessing game of I'm gonna assume Duncan.
Yeah,
Okay.
nailed it.
Um, I mean Alfie really gives me some pinky ring vibes.
Yep, he sure had one. Yep.
All right, 2 for 2. Here we go.
I Okay, I don't expect you to get the last 2,
Oh
because they
really?
were like very quick characters, so they're not very memorable.
Okay.
But you got the main 2, so you did great. You win.
Yay. Okay, wonderful. Also, great data points. Fabulous data
Yes.
points. Who are the other two?
Okay, so uh in at the beginning of the movie, when they're in the surgery and Willem Dafoe's character is doing his thing, there are 2 students who are having a conversation, and then like Max interrupts and the students are rude to him. The blonde one has
Of
a pinky ring on his finger and he is a jerk. So I went, okay, that tracks.
that tracks. That tracks. See, I was having a great view of the palm of my hand during that scene because livers are being taken out and inserted back in to bodies
Yes, that's true. That's
that are
true.
cut wide open. Okay,
I
that's a
did,
great point.
because I think I watched this movie before you did. I meant to text you and say, Jen, don't eat snacks during this
Uh,
movie. And clearly I forgot to, because I had my snacks. I was all ready to go. And then we went into the surgery and I went, oh no, I've made a mistake.
You know, but like surprisingly, for what is actually shown on screen,
Yeah.
a lot of it didn't actually bother me as much, and I
Oh,
don't
good.
know why. Perhaps I'm just like this movie. I'm okay. Whatever happens, I'm here. I'm arrived at the journey. I don't know, but they didn't bother me as much as I expected to. For what it is, like
Good.
they're literally like taking bullets out of stuff,
Hmm.
full on shots, livers flying around. You know. Uh, okay. What's the fourth one?
The fourth one is when they're in Lisbon, there is a woman who is singing and playing some sort of instrument on the
Yeah.
balcony, and she is wearing a pinky ring. So
Oh,
I feel like that
the
again
female one.
reinforces our
Female.
theory of
Yeah.
it doesn't always apply to women.
Yep. Yep.
So
This is
I
perfect. That is
this
a
is
great data point to
yeah.
showcase where the line between these two data sets are.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's very good.
Yep.
Good
So
collection of things. I would have thought it would be one of the many men in Paris.
yeah, I tried
You were
to
looking.
pay attention, but there was a lot going on. So I
There's yes.
there was a couple of them that like there was one in particular, he wore a large ring on like one of his fingers and it wasn't his pinky ring though.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, that's not it. But I was trying to keep a lookout. I'm sure I might have missed one or two, but we
There's a
tried.
lot happening in those scenes, so. I don't blame you. All right. Well, my last thought is just I'm just so excited and intrigued by the attention this is getting and the amount of people that are seeing this movie. This is the type of movie that like we get excited about, but not a single person that we know in
Hmm.
our personal circles has seen this at all.
Yeah.
And I've chatted about this movie with a coworker. I have a family friend that I'm not even that close to that reached out and said, "Hey, this is a great movie. You should go see it because he knows
Wow.
I'm into movies." So just the amount of people that have seen this is exciting, and I don't know. I think that as we turn the corner now, the past couple of years of um, kind of these big budget franchise movies, and the year of Barbenheimer last year, and clearly there's demand and appetite for kind of these really artistic, creative, fresh visions for what a movie can be. This is an exciting new addition on that journey that we're going on right now. So, obviously not the same amount of like mass appeal like Barbie, Oppenheimer, and whatnot, but still more than I would have ever expected for a movie like this. So it's exciting.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's cool to know that there is a market for movies like this and that people are going to see it. And, these creative, interesting stories told by these really creative filmmakers are worth funding and worth bringing to the big screen because clearly people will watch it. So
Yeah.
it's really heartening for people like us who really enjoy these
Yes.
types of interesting, out there kind of movies, and we want to see more of this in the world.
I would like to propose that we grab some beach chairs and just camp outside of a theater and just intercept people to be like, I need to know what you think about this movie right now, right this moment. I need to know. Tell me all of your thoughts. Give me your brain. Can I open up your brain? Is that possible? Because I'm just so intrigued to hear just the wide variety of perspectives about this movie. It'd be fascinating.
Yeah, I when I walked into my theater, because there wasn't like a clear dominant like demographic in my theater. There was a good
Okay.
smattering of ages, gender, like it was
Yeah.
a fairly diverse audience that I was in the midst of. And so I really wanted to do a poll beforehand and just be like, okay, why did you choose this movie? What do you know about it? Like just do the interrogation on the front end, and then we watch the movie. I wanted to do a focus group with my theater
Yes.
basically, and
Exciting.
then afterwards, what did you think about it? Tell me more. Go through all
Yeah.
the questions. Yeah, that
Yes.
would be a great time because I
Really fun.
had a lot of questions for the other people in my theater.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Uh, but alas, we shall do it through the interwebs and
Exactly.
here on our podcast. Yes, I love
Perfect.
it.
Nailed it.
Hmm. All right. Well, this was our review discussion of Poor Things. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you hung out with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Poor Things. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at moviesandUsPod, or email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film The Book of Clarence. We hope you have an amazing weekend. We'll see you very soon.